Well, many people are very critical of what we call foreign direct investment, the idea that actually Africa should be generating its own wealth, and if small to medium enterprises overseas don't want to invest in us, well, screw them. But obviously the study takes a very different stance on that and shows the value of those types of investment.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think foreign investment is very important, and again, if you travel around Africa, you only have to go to any one of the 51 countries we operate in to see the massive input and impact China's having on Africa, as an example, or Asia and Asia Pacific in more broader sense. So I think foreign direct investment, and you're right, there are lots of sort of views, positive and negative, about whether it's right, good, bad, or indifferent. But certainly when you travel from a road from the airport in DRC down to Kinshasa, which now takes 20 minutes, which used to take 4 hours, I think it's a pretty good example of what investment can create, whether it be airports, roads, infrastructure, and that's one of Africa's biggest challenges. So I think whether it comes from Africa, or whether it comes from Asia Pacific or Europe or the US, I'm not sure that matters. I think it's about, again, creating a sustainable economy. So investment from our perspective is a good thing. We certainly from DHL perspective, we invest a lot of money here to build a market-leading product. And from an SME perspective, if you look at what that research showed. And again, as I said earlier on, just to repeat that, there were sort of two polarised different opinions in some respects. One was, if you're not here, coming here is difficult, and if you're here already, they feel actually it's very positive. And I think that's due to, if you imagine for 1 second you're an SME in Singapore, an SME in London, or an SME in Moscow, and you're considering going international, what the research showed is that whilst SMEs, more than 50%, see that international growth is really good for their sustainable position, what also came through in research is that they are more likely to expand with markets that they feel comfortable with, and that the comfortable part is to do with sort of language, culture, environments, infrastructure, safety, security, that type of thing. And again, rather interestingly, in this research and vis-a-vis other research we've done previously, this showed that SMEs, certainly in their first instance, expand to like markets, and that's true in Africa too. If you look at SMEs in Ethiopia or SMEs in Senegal or in South Africa, typically, and take South Africa as an example, typically that SME will probably expand to Southern Africa first and won't reach out to China or India or the UK, because it's not an environment or a culture they're familiar with. So that's probably not too surprising, but it was the first time we've kind of seen it. So that was in itself was very interesting. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, the research shows that any SME that goes global, that connects with the more than 220 countries that we operate in, is likely to be 2 times more successful than a domestic SME, and that's also very interesting. And if you bring that back to Africa, and one of the things that surprised me when I first came here was that there are a lot of really very entrepreneurial companies in Africa, and in fact probably more entrepreneurial than I've seen anywhere else. But their knowledge of how to go global, how do I find a customer, how do I go into a different market, was somewhat limited. That's point number one. Point number two is, unless you're in a city, if I wanted to connect with somebody like DHL, it's quite hard to do. So if you're, for example, I was in Tanzania last week, and if you're in Arusha, and until recently, if you wanted to send a parcel with DHL, the nearest access point was something like 200 kilometers away. So if you can't access someone like DHL to be able to move your product internationally in the first place, that's problem number two. And then problem number three is, of course, the very usual subject around financing. How do I grow my business in order to be able to take it internationally and start connecting with the rest of the world? So those three attributes come through very, very consistently in all the research we do. So we're working very hard now to act on those. And in particular, on the knowledge piece, in fact, yesterday we ran the first pilot in Johannesburg of what we call CIS SME, so that's Certified International Specialist SME, where we'll teach any SME free of charge how to go global. So how to market their product, which markets to look at, how to get around the cultural issues. So for example, if you're in China, where we sit is really important. How we talk to each other is really important. So we'll teach them cultural uniqueness of the world, about how to operate. Even in Africa there's some interesting ones, And we'll teach them how to do paperwork, we'll teach them how to do invoicing, get through customs clearance, that type of activity. So free of charge, and that'll be rolled out next year across Africa, which will be really exciting. We're getting some very, very positive feedback on that from SMEs. I think it's really tangible value that they can get from somebody like us. And then secondly, in terms of accessibility, and this is a really, really important one for Africa. If you 2-3 years ago, we had something like 300 locations where you could access DHL across Africa. So across 51 countries, 1 billion people, 300 access points. That's clearly not enough. So we've been on a very rapid expansion program. Now we have nearly 3,500 access points across Africa, and to the point in Tanzania and Arusha. If you drive down the road, the main road there in Arusha, you'll see about 20 DHL access points where SMEs can access. So we're really trying to expand the coverage, and again, at a macro level, something like 40% of the 1 billion population live in the city, so 60% of the population lives outside, and any one of those 60% could be a really great SME. So it's really important that we expand and get into the rural areas of Africa and allow those companies, if they want to then start taking their fantastic entrepreneurial products globally. And then from the last point around financing, clearly we're not a bank, but we have launched a product called Express Easy, which is absolutely focused at the SME at a